They found the children on the third day of searching, all four of them, standing in a perfect line at the mouth of the hollow, hands clasped together, silent as stones. None of them would speak. None of them would say where they'd been. And when the doctor examined them later that evening, he found something that made him lock his notes in a drawer and never speak of it again. This is the story of the Ellison family, and what happened in 1976 wasn't the beginning. It was the echo of something much, much older. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The Ellison family had lived in Crane County, Missouri for 4 generations by the time the children vanished. They were not wealthy. They were not important. They were the kind of family that kept to themselves, worked the land, and attended Sunday service without fail. Thomas Ellison was 41 years old in 1976. His wife, Margaret, was 38. Together they had 4 children: Sarah, age 12, Daniel, age 10, Rebecca, age 7, and the youngest, Michael, just 5 years old. On the morning of August 14th, 1976, Margaret Ellison woke to find the children's beds empty. The front door was standing open. The house was silent. No note, no sign of struggle, just gone. Thomas called the sheriff at 6:43 in the morning. By noon, there were search parties combing the woods. By nightfall, the entire county knew the Ellison children were missing, and everyone whispered the same thing: the Hollow. They went into the Hollow. The Hollow had a name, but no one used it. For over 100 years, it had simply been called the Hollow, as if giving it a proper name would make it more real. It sat 2 miles northwest of the Ellison property, a deep ravine thick with black oak and wild sumac, where the sun barely touched the ground. Local teenagers dared each other to go there. Old men warned against it, and mothers told their children that if they misbehaved, the Hollow would take them. It was a story, until it wasn't. The search began in chaos. Volunteers arrived from 3 counties over, some on foot, others on horseback. The Missouri State Highway Patrol sent 2 units. Dogs were brought in, trained bloodhounds that could track a scent through water and mud. But when they reached the edge of the Hollow, every single dog stopped. They whined. They pulled backward on their leads. One handler, a man named Vernon Cross, who had worked search and rescue for 16 years, later told a reporter that he'd never seen anything like it. The dogs were terrified. And animals, he said, don't lie about fear. By the second day, the search had grown desperate. Helicopters swept overhead, their rotors echoing through the trees. Local men formed chains and walked shoulder to shoulder through the underbrush, calling the children's names until their voices went hoarse. Margaret Ellison stood at the edge of the Hollow, pale and shaking, refusing to leave. Thomas stayed with her, his face like carved wood, saying nothing. The sheriff, a man named Earl Dobson, organized the efforts with military precision, but even he avoided going too deep into the Hollow. There was something about the place, something that made grown men stop and turn back without explanation. Then, on the morning of August 17th, at exactly 6:15, a volunteer named James Pritchard saw them. 4 children, standing in a straight line at the mouth of the Hollow, facing outward. Their clothes were dirty but intact. Their faces were clean. They stood perfectly still, hands clasped in front of them, staring at nothing. Pritchard shouted, and within minutes the entire search party had converged. Margaret ran to them, screaming their names. But the children didn't move. They didn't blink. They didn't react at all. It was Thomas who finally stepped forward and touched Sarah's shoulder. Only then did she turn her head slowly and look at him. Her eyes were empty. They were taken to Crane County Hospital immediately. Dr. Raymond Kepler, the only physician within 30 miles, conducted the examinations himself. Physically, the children were unharmed. No injuries, no signs of exposure or dehydration. Their vitals were normal. Their weight hadn't changed. It was as if they had been kept somewhere safe, clean, and carefully maintained. But there were 2 things Dr. Kepler could not explain. The first was their silence. None of the children spoke, not a word, not a sound. The second was something he found during the examination, something he documented in his notes and then locked away. On the back of each child's neck, just below the hairline, was a mark, a small, precise indentation in the shape of a crescent, identical on all 4 children. as if something had pressed itself there, gently, deliberately, and left its signature behind. The children came home on August 19th. The house felt different now, as if something had followed them back. Margaret tried to resume normal life. She cooked their favorite meals. She read to them at bedtime. She sang the hymns they used to sing together on Sunday mornings, but the children only stared. They ate when food was placed in front of them. They bathed when told. They slept in their beds without protest. But they did not speak. They did not play. They did not cry. It was as if they had returned as hollow replicas of themselves, moving through the motions of childhood without any of its substance. Thomas grew distant. He stopped going to church. He spent long hours in the barn, working on nothing, avoiding the house. Neighbors brought casseroles and pies, stood awkwardly in the doorway offering sympathy and prayers, then left quickly, unsettled by the atmosphere inside. One woman, Doris Klein, later told her daughter that being in that house felt like standing in a graveyard. The air was too still, the silence too heavy, and the children, she said, looked at you like they were seeing something behind you, something you couldn't see. By September, Margaret insisted the children see a specialist. Dr. Kepler referred them to a psychiatrist in Jefferson City, a man named Dr. Arthur Weston who specialized in childhood trauma. The family made the 2-hour drive every Wednesday for 6 weeks. Dr. Weston met with each child individually, then together, then with the parents present. He used toys, drawings, gentle questions. He tried silence. He tried music. Nothing worked. The children remained mute. But during the 4th session, something happened that Dr. Weston documented in his case notes, notes that would later be sealed by court order and marked confidential. He was alone with Sarah, the oldest, in his office. He had asked her to draw her family. She picked up a black crayon and began to draw, her movements slow and methodical. She drew the house, she drew her parents, she drew her siblings, and then, in the corner of the page, she drew something else. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, with elongated limbs and a head that seemed too large for its body. Dr. Weston watched, saying nothing. When Sarah finished, she set down the crayon, looked directly at him, and spoke for the first time in 5 weeks. Her voice was flat, emotionless, almost mechanical. She said, "He's still watching." Then she returned to silence. And no matter what Dr. Weston tried, she never spoke again. Dr. Weston did something then that would change everything. He began to research, not the children, but the Hollow itself. He drove to Crane County on a Saturday morning in October, unannounced, and went to the public library. It was a small building, cramped and dusty, run by a woman named Helen Marsh, who had been the librarian for 33 years. When Weston asked about the history of the Hollow, Helen's face went pale. She told him there were records, old records, things most people had forgotten, or chosen to forget. She brought him a box from the back room, filled with newspapers, ledgers, and handwritten accounts dating back to 1872. What he found inside made him cancel his afternoon appointments and stay until the library closed. The Ellison children were not the first. In 1923, 3 children from the Porter family vanished for 4 days. They were found at the edge of the Hollow, silent and unharmed, with identical marks on their necks. In 1909, 2 siblings named the Coleridge children disappeared for nearly a week. Same location, same silence, same marks. In 1894, the daughter of a preacher went missing for 5 days. She returned, changed, mute, and died 3 years later without ever speaking again. And the pattern went further back still, 1876, 1861, 1849. Every incident followed the same template. Children vanishing, days passing, discovery at the Hollow's edge, silence, marks, and then, always, something worse that followed. Dr. Weston copied everything he could. He interviewed the few remaining relatives of the previous families, those still alive who remembered. An elderly woman named Ruth Porter, granddaughter of the 1923 victims, told him something her grandmother had whispered on her deathbed. She said the children came back wrong, that they seemed like her children, looked like her children, but weren't truly her children anymore. She said they moved differently, stared differently, and late at night, she would hear them whispering in a language she didn't recognize, standing in a circle in the backyard, looking up at nothing. He found a journal entry from 1878, written by a frontier doctor named Silas Crane. the man the county was eventually named after. Crane had examined 2 children who returned from the Hollow. He described the crescent marks. He described their silence. And then he wrote something chilling. He wrote that on the 7th night after their return, both children woke screaming at exactly 3:33 in the morning. They spoke in unison, their voices overlapping perfectly, saying the same phrase over and over. He keeps us when we sleep. He keeps us when we dream. He will keep us all. Crane noted that the parents, terrified, took the children to a reverend for blessing. 3 days later, the entire family was found dead in their home. No signs of violence. No explanation. Just gone. Dr. Weston drove back to the Ellison home on November 2nd, 1976. It had been exactly 11 weeks since the children were found. He arrived unannounced, just before dusk, and found Thomas sitting on the porch, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. Weston asked to speak with him privately. They walked to the barn, away from the house, and Weston told him everything. The pattern, the history, the journal entries, and most importantly, the 7th night. Thomas listened without interruption, his face growing harder with each word. When Weston finished, Thomas asked him one question. What happens on the 7th night? Weston told him the truth. He didn't know. But every account suggested that was when things changed. When whatever had taken the children came to collect what it was owed. Margaret refused to believe it. She was a faithful woman, a practical woman, and she would not entertain talk of curses or folklore or supernatural debts. Her children were traumatized, she insisted. They needed time, prayer, and love, not ghost stories from a psychiatrist who had spent too long reading old newspapers. But Thomas believed. And that night, after Margaret went to bed, he did something he had never done before. He loaded his shotgun, checked every lock in the house, and sat in a chair facing the children's bedroom door. He would not sleep, he would not look away, and if something came for his children, he would be ready. Nothing happened that night, or the next. The children continued their silent routines. Margaret grew more hopeful. Dr. Weston called twice to check on them, his voice tight with concern. Thomas said everything was fine, but he kept the shotgun within reach. He stopped going to the barn. He barely ate. He watched the children constantly, searching their faces for something he couldn't name. And on the night of November 9th, 1976, exactly 12 weeks after the children were found, Thomas fell asleep in his chair at 11:47. He woke 3 hours later to the sound of the front door opening. The children were walking outside. All 4 of them, moving in perfect synchronization, their bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Thomas grabbed his shotgun and followed them into the yard. They walked toward the tree line, toward the hollow, their hands clasped together just like the day they were found. Thomas shouted at them to stop. They didn't. He ran ahead, blocked their path, aimed the shotgun at the darkness beyond them. And that's when he saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the woods, impossibly tall, impossibly thin. Its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. But Thomas felt it watching him. Felt it reaching into his mind, pulling at something deep inside his chest. He raised the gun, his finger tightened on the trigger, and then Sarah spoke, her voice flat and emotionless, the first words she had said since Dr. Weston's office. Don't. He'll take all of us if you do. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments what would you have done if this was your bloodline. Thomas lowered the gun. His hands were trembling so violently he nearly dropped it. The figure at the tree line remained motionless, a shadow among shadows, watching with an attention that felt ancient and patient. The children stood between them, still holding hands, their faces blank in the moonlight. Sarah turned her head toward her father, and for just a moment, Thomas saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition, fear, love, and then it was gone, replaced by that terrible emptiness. She spoke again, her voice still flat, still wrong. He wants us back. He always wanted us back, but he'll wait. He's always waiting. Thomas asked her what she meant. Sarah didn't answer. Instead, all 4 children turned in unison and walked back toward the house. The figure in the trees didn't follow. It simply stood there, unmoving, until the children disappeared inside. Then, slowly, it stepped backward into the darkness and vanished. Thomas stood alone in the yard for over an hour, the shotgun clutched against his chest, staring at the spot where the thing had been. When he finally went inside, Margaret was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her Bible open in front of her. She looked at him with hollow eyes and said, "I heard them. I heard them whispering." She had been listening through the bedroom door. The children, she said, had been speaking in their sleep, all four voices overlapping, saying the same words over and over in a language that sounded like wind through dead leaves. Thomas called Dr. Weston the next morning. Weston arrived by afternoon, this time bringing another man with him, Dr. Emil Voss, a colleague from the university who specialized in anthropology and religious history. Voss had studied ritualistic practices, ancient beliefs, folkloric patterns across cultures. Weston had told him everything. Voss listened to Thomas's account of the previous night, examined the children, and then asked to see the hollow. Thomas refused. Voss insisted. Finally, Thomas agreed, but only during daylight, and only if they stayed at the edge. They drove out together, parked at the tree line, and walked to where Thomas had seen the figure. Voss knelt down, studying the ground. There were no footprints, no disturbance in the soil, but there was something else. The trees closest to that spot were dead, not dying, dead. Their bark blackened, their branches brittle, as if something had drained the life from them simply by standing nearby. Voss took photographs. He collected soil samples. He made notes in a leather journal he kept in his coat pocket. Then he turned to Thomas and Weston and said something that would haunt them both for the rest of their lives. He said there were places in the world, rare places, where the boundary between what we understand and what we don't becomes thin. Places where something old, something that existed before human language or human memory, could reach through. The hollow, he believed, was one of those places. And the children hadn't been taken by a person or an animal. They had been claimed by something that didn't operate by human rules. Something that marked them, kept them, and now considered them its property. The only reason they were returned, Voss said, was because it wasn't finished with them yet. It was waiting for something. A specific moment, a specific condition, and when that moment came, it would take them back, permanently. The Ellison family left Crane County on November 15, 1976. They packed what they could fit into their truck, said nothing to their neighbors, and drove away before sunrise. Thomas had made the decision alone. Margaret didn't argue. The children didn't react. They simply got into the vehicle and stared straight ahead as the house, the land, and the hollow disappeared behind them. They moved to Kansas City, found a small apartment in a neighborhood where no one knew their name or their history. Thomas found work at a factory. Margaret took a job cleaning offices at night. The children were enrolled in a new school under the pretense that they were recovering from an illness that had affected their speech, and for a while, it seemed like distance might be enough. Like maybe, if they stayed far enough away, whatever had claimed them would forget. But the children never spoke again. Not one word. Not in all the years that followed. Sarah learned to communicate through writing. Daniel and Rebecca used gestures, nods, simple drawings. Michael, the youngest, remained the most distant, spending hours staring out windows as if watching for something only he could see. Teachers reported that the children were intelligent, obedient, but profoundly disconnected. They had no friends. They showed no interest in play or socializing. They aged in body but seemed frozen in some other way, as if part of them had never left that place in the woods. Margaret prayed every night. Thomas drank, and the family fractured quietly, held together only by the shared weight of what they could never speak about. Dr. Weston continued his research for 3 more years. He compiled a report, over 200 pages long, documenting every disappearance connected to the hollow, dating back to 1847. He submitted it to the Missouri State Historical Society, to psychiatric journals, to anyone who might listen. It was dismissed as folklore, rejected as unprofessional, and eventually suppressed. In 1979, Weston received a letter from the Crane County Sheriff's Office informing him that all records related to the Ellison case had been sealed by court order. No explanation was given. Dr. Voss's photographs and soil samples disappeared from the university archives. Helen Marsh, the librarian, died in 1981. The box of historical records she had shown Weston was never found. It was as if someone, or something, was erasing the evidence piece by piece. Thomas Ellison died in 1994. Heart attack, the coroner said, though those who knew him suspected he had simply given up. Margaret lived until 2003, never remarrying, never returning to Missouri. Of the children, only Rebecca is confirmed to still be alive. She lives alone in a small town in northern Kansas. She never married. She never had children of her own. And according to the few who have spoken with her, she still does not speak. But on certain nights, neighbors report seeing her standing in her backyard, perfectly still, staring toward the southeast, toward Missouri, toward the Hollow, as if she's listening for something, as if she's waiting for a call that never quite comes, but never quite fades either. The Hollow still stands. The land was purchased by the state in 1988 and declared a protected wilderness area, closed to the public. No trails, no access, no explanation given. But locals say that on certain nights, if you drive past it on the old county road, you can see lights moving through the trees. Pale lights that don't flicker like flashlights or headlamps, but glide smoothly, purposefully, as if something is walking a route it has walked 1,000 times before. And sometimes, people report hearing voices, children's voices, singing in unison, a melody no one recognizes, in words no one can understand. The Ellison children were found in 1976, but the truth is, they never really came back. Something kept part of them. And if the pattern holds, if history repeats the way it always has, then somewhere, in some small town, in some quiet family, children are already being watched, already being chosen, already being marked. Because the Hollow is patient, and it never forgets what belongs to it. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. Tell us where you're from. Tell us what you think really happened. And remember, some places don't let go. Some places just wait.